Hey guys, I just got back from another little Craigslist expedition. A few weeks ago I stumbled across a listing for a 1953 Admiral chassis with tubes and various parts, and he said he might have some other TVs and radios as well, and the stuff was free, so hey, free is good, plus he lived about 3 miles away, so I contacted him and figured I'd go check out what he had. Well, he said he was busy. It turns out the property, I guess it belonged to his parents, and he was having to clean it out before they could sell it off. So a few weeks went by, and I finally heard back from him, and he said, yeah, sure, I could stop by. We arranged a time, and that time was today, so I just got back. Turns out it was not a 1953 Admiral. It was a 1948 Admiral, which I'm sure looks very familiar to any of you who have watched my videos, because I've done so many sets with very similar looking chassis. I say very similar looking because this is actually a 30B one, whereas I restored a couple 30A ones recently. What's the difference? Very, very subtle. In fact, I'd have to refer to the service info to figure out what the difference was. Now, where did this come from? Well, it turns out he actually did still have the cabinets. And I guess it had been passed down through his family, and he wanted to keep using it in some manner or fashion, so he was going to put a modern flat-screen TV inside. Well, okay, you know, it's his side, he can do what he wants. Plus, he just didn't have the skill or even know if there was anybody out there that could actually restore this. Anyways, it was actually the blonde version. I have a blonde 30A16, his I guess was a 30B16 or something like that. Almost identical, just a different cutout for the CRT mask. Now, he said that this set was working until the 90s, and that he thought that a transformer burned out on it. I don't know about that. I mean, maybe. I know there's one problem. At some point, somewhere along the line, the 5U4 rectifier got bent over and the key broke off, so this could be a problem. But who knows? Now, I figure I'll just use this for parts. I'm especially hoping the picture tube is good, and the speaker, it's a nice field coil speaker. I have a 22x12 and the field coil on that set seems to be open, and this might be close enough. But of course the cone needs a little bit of help. But I think the voice coil is probably okay. Seems to be moving at any rate. I'll probably glue that back together, patch this thing up, or possibly find a cone that's close enough, a modern one, to recone it with. And then, of course, you know, various tubes and coils. One thing I'm especially interested in salvaging is this power transformer. I have a couple Philco farm radios, a 623 and a 643, and I want to build a battery eliminator. I had proposed using, well, I'll pull it out and show you what I'm talking about. I had proposed using this transformer for the power supply, but it's a little light. The tubes, I think, ran on 2 volts and a bit of current. I think 1.2 amps was just enough, but cutting 6.3 volts down would waste a bunch of power. But more importantly was the secondary. This is only good for 10 milliamps, and the set drawed, I think, 20 or 22. Now, I was assuming it was 10 amps per side, so in a full wave configuration, it's going to put out 20 milliamps. Anyways, I rigged up just some rectifiers and some filter caps and some dummy loads, and it seemed like it could maybe just work, but it was really pushing this thing to its limits. Well, it turns out that this transformer is a bit beefier and should work better. So it works with a 5Y3 rectifier. So there's a 5 volt 2 amp winding, I think, which I think will work better for the filaments on the farm sets. And the secondary's got more current capabilities. So I think that'll make a nice little transformer. Or I could go to this guy, which is plenty beefy enough. It's just, I think, a little overkill, so I'll try using this guy. I'm also curious too, since I really have no intention of restoring this to usefulness, because I don't have a cabinet for it, and I've already got some other spare Admiral chassis. Give this thing a little trial power up after I inspect what's underneath these, and See that there's nothing critical like a cap that's blown out its guts or anything like that. Well, but before I do that, let's take a look at a few other things I picked up recently. One of the items that just arrived in the mail today, I hope will be a solution to this mess. Something that I've been putting off for far too long, which is somewhere to hang all my cables. Right now I've just got them in a closet along with my various coats and shirts and whatnot in this pantry off my kitchen. So I just threw them over this this pole here, which it's not the most convenient thing. I have to keep walking over from my workshop to this closet, but also the cables from hanging here for so long start to get permanently bent and kinked. So, sure, I figured I could make my own, take some wood or metal and maybe a router or a table saw or something, cut notches into it and hang the cables up, but I figured there's got to be a pre-made cable hanger out there. And sure enough, I did a little bit of searching on the web and I found various places carrying it and a little YouTube review as well. And it turns out the Mauser carried them, so I ordered up a couple and they just arrived. Now, I order stuff from Mauser Electronics all the time, but this order was a little different. Later in the day, after I placed my order, I received a notification from somebody in the Mauser shipping department asking me to fill out a form. First I thought it might be a scam or something, and I looked into it, and no, this was legitimate. And the form was something to verify that I was not going to export any of these items to a hostile country, I think is the way it was worded. I had to fill out a couple of things and then sign it. I recall getting one of those a long time ago, like when I would order, like, say, a microprocessor or something, or you know, some piece of cutting-edge technology what I could understand. But as far as I know, the stuff I ordered, there's no way any of this stuff is technology sensitive. You got some just plain old electrolytic Nichicon capacitors, a mica capacitor, and some resistors, and a few plastic film caps. It's the kind of stuff I order all the time. So I don't know if it's just boilerplate that they make everybody fill out now, or are these half-watt metal film resistors now controlled items? I don't know. Or is it the cable hangers made by Pomona Electronics? I don't know. But regardless, I filled out their form and delayed my order by a day or two, but here we go. So I got two different sizes. This would be for smaller diameter cables, and this for a little fatter ones, like, say, BNC scope probes. Deal is, you screw these into the wall, and they hang like this, and they got these metal teeth, and you slide your leads onto them. So pop these guys out, find a suitable location on my wall, and ideally find some studs. Otherwise, well, I don't think there's a whole lot of weight on these. I have plaster and lath walls, and if I get some anchors going in through the plaster into the lath, it'll probably be strong enough. Because these aren't wide enough to really span from stud to stud, so some of these screws are not going to go into studs, that's for sure. Got was a couple cheater cords. Believe it or not, these are getting harder and harder to find all the time. So I set up a search on eBay, and I got an alert one day that somebody was selling a couple for 10 bucks a piece, which seems like a lot of money, but that's actually a pretty fair price these days. The last one I saw one for 15 bucks. I think I saw one sell for closer to 20 recently. Especially in demand are these type with the ears on them, because they fit onto these old sets. So if anybody out there's got a few of these lying around, I'd be very happy to buy them off of you, because I have more sets than I do good cheater cords. And finally, I have this rather nice RCA Image Orthicon. This is the heart of a black and white studio TV camera. I think they used these in the 50s up into the early 60s. This would be the 3-inch diameter type, somewhat newer variety. There was also a 4.5-inch type I'd like to get someday, so this is so gigantic looking. And these were the successor to the old iconoscope, which I'd really like to get someday. And I know there's one on eBay right now, but they want $400 for it. Plus, it's the more common variety, which is a smaller version the military used for things like, guided bombs. Yes, they actually did have video guided bombs like you see today on the drones and whatnot. They had them way back in World War II. I think that's the 1846. The 1840 is the really early, hard to find type they actually used in TV studios in the pre-war experimental days. Anyways, I'll pop this out so you get a better look at it. I have no idea if it's actually any good or not, but I don't really care. I have no intention of actually trying to use it in anything. I certainly don't have a camera that would use it. Those cameras were huge. Plus, there was some the support equipment. It's quite an undertaking to get all that stuff together. They call it the camera chain, which I believe stands for this, the chain of equipment you connect the camera to make it all work. So there's where your image would be focused on. It's some type of light sensitive element inside there, and it'd be I believe electromagnets around here to deflect the electron beam that hits the opposite side of that photosensitive surface to scan the beam. I'm not sure what the electrodes are around the top. I would guess some type of focusing. And there's also a whole lot of pins on the bottom. And then there's various elements in here which I'm pretty sure are photo multiplying. In other words, increase the light sensitivity of the device. And these were later replaced by the much, much smaller Vidicon tubes, which were more like 3/4 of an inch in diameter and maybe 4 or 5 inches long. Black and white, of course. The color cameras would actually have 3 of these in them, which is they're just really, really massive. Rather amazing looking devices. So I just wanted this for a shelf display, so I really have no intention of using it. This looks awfully clean though, which makes me think this was probably a later production, maybe for replacement purposes rather than an original one from the 50s. I'm not sure where I would find a day code on something like this. Nothing obvious that jumps out at me. I've got one test lead hanger mounted. I'm about to put the other one up. See, the spacing on these fingers is a bit wider for thicker cable. What I did was I figured out what was an appropriate height. Basically, I just saw, standing on the floor, how high up I could reach comfortably, and that's the height I used for these. So, see, there's a light switch, so these are, I don't know, 6.5 feet, something like that. Up. Now my place is pretty old, like 130 years plus, so you never know what you're going to find when you drill into these walls. On this side, a couple of the holes was like there's no structure there whatsoever. There's just old plaster and the drill. I drilled pilot holes, of course. I don't want to just drive screws into these. The walls could crack. And I just punched through a layer of plaster, probably something like that thick, and it was just nothing, just hollow all the way back like that deep. But the other two bit into something, and there's not a whole lot of weight on these, so I think that'll be good enough. Curiously though, these 4 are at the same horizontal level, and these all had a lot of structure behind them. Definitely solid wood. Now plaster and lath walls, they got thin strips of wood running horizontally, and they push the plaster onto it, and it squeezes through gaps in between the lath and hardens and forms kind of like a key to hold the plaster onto the wall. So I'm thinking maybe some of these holes were drilled just between 2 bits of lath strapping, and you know, so be it. But for sure, these are all going to be very solid. All four of these definitely bit into some substantial wood behind them. So maybe I'll just make sure to put the heavier cables on this guy. Or, yeah, I could try positioning this up or down lower, but I don't want to drill any more holes in my walls than necessary. So as long as it stays up here solid, I'm going to leave it alone. Alright, I got all these 4 screws in now, and they're definitely biting into some wood, so this one's going to be held on there really secure. If you're wondering what kind of screws I'm using, I got them from this drywall hanger mounting kit thing. The idea being that you drill out a larger hole and you screw in this bit of plastic that's threaded internally, and then you drive the metal screw into it. These don't work too well on these eggshell thin plaster walls, so I'm just using the screws. Now these screws were a bit smaller, but I ran out of those, so I'm using larger ones on this side, and they just barely fit through these holes. Now, if I was careful when I drilled these, this should line up well enough that I can get it on. Alright. And come on. There we go. I'll just tighten those screws down, and there we go. Alright, I got both the hangers mounted and went around my workshop and gathered up all my cables and the cables out of the closet, and I've somewhat arranged them in a logical order. We'll see how things evolve. One concern I've got is if I put multiples in one slot and I'm always reaching for one versus the other, maybe I should, you know, group them in different ways. We'll see how that goes, but for now, certainly it's one a heck of a lot better than it was. Another package has arrived just in time to be included in this video. This is from an online friend of mine. We exchanged some messages and a phone call, so I think I know what's going to be in this box. Let's take a look. And yeah, right away I can see there's a book. And something else I didn't expect to be getting anytime soon from anyone, which is one of the no longer being produced reproduction VT71 masks. The reason I'm so happy to get one, well, aside from them being no longer reproduced and available for sale, is that I need one for that mahogany VT71 that I restored a few weeks ago, where I meticulously restuffed all the capacitors. This is from the Eli Buck auction on the East Coast. It's got the original finish in fine condition, and since I made that video, I was able to touch up the decal area, remove the traces of the old decals, apply new ones, and clear coat over them. And I also painted the Motorola logo, so it's in great condition except for the heavily deteriorated mask. Not only that, but I've since powered this up with the CRT in the set, because if you recall, when I restored this set, it was on the workbench with a loose CRT that I had extra. When I connected it to the CRT in this set, the picture's really cockeyed, and I can't really rotate this CRT because it's kind of stuck to this mask, which is now rock hard. So I need to loosen it up and rotate it, and this whole thing will probably just fall apart when I try doing that. So very happy to get a reproduction mask. They may be produced again someday, I don't know, but for the time being they are not currently available. As for the book, it's not one that I'm familiar with. It's Television by Zworykin, that's how you pronounce that, or Zworykin, and Morton. Zworykin worked at RCA, and he was one of the pioneers of TV. So this will be an interesting book. I'll pop it out of the plastic here, and I'm going to take a look at the copyright date and some of the content. I've collected a few books on television from the late 30s into the late 40s. In other words, the dawn of commercial television, but I've not encountered this one before. Oh, know where it came from at some point. Let's see. Other books. Some authors. Okay, 1940. So this is pre-war. Or at least pre our involvement in the war. And it's not a later edition, son. This is the first edition. So I like getting these books because it's before they adopted the later NTSC standard with 525 lines and more modern designs. These older books, they're all older technology. No miniature tubes, no 7 and 9 pin tubes. They're going to be all octal, or even older. They're going to have the old 4, 5, 6, 7 pin tubes. And I mentioned that iconoscope earlier. I'm sure there's a picture of one in here somewhere. Oh, and fun. Math. Differential equations. It's crazy how they do all this math to figure out the electron path and how to deflect it with magnetic or electric fields to get a good raster on the screen. All a thing of the past, but back then it's a big deal. It's a photomultiplier tube. I believe that's the same type of technology used in that orthicon I showed earlier. Wow. That is crazy. It's an electron microscope, but nothing like they look today. That thing's huge. And that looks like a Farnsworth image dissector, the predecessor to the iconoscope. They really cover a whole lot in this book. This whole section is on how they construct vacuum tubes in various types of glass, like Pyrex or lime glass, how they evacuate them, or spot welders to assemble the elements. I thought this book was just going to be on television transmission and reception, but no, this is on everything involved in the whole process. There we go. Section 2, or Part 2 rather, Principle. Alright, here we go. Part 2, Principles of Television, finally. Here they're showing various resolutions. It'd be like 75p, 150p, 225, in other words, far less than the resolutions we're used to today. Yeah, this book definitely goes into old school stuff. They've got stuff on mechanical television. This is like 20s technology, even though this book is from 1940. Wow. That thing's crazy. Flying spot scanner. This is a section on electronic pickup, so in other words video cameras. So there's the Farnsworth image dissector. Farnsworth, well, he had some bad luck. He pioneered this all-electronic television system, and he patented all this stuff. But then World War II broke out, and his patents expired in the early 40s, from what I understand. So, this is just his bad luck. Well, here is the iconoscope. Sure they have a picture of one in here somewhere. No, it's crazy. They just had the crude representation of one, not an actual picture of one. I know they were early in 40, but they certainly existed. Alright, cool. There's some pre-war sets. If any of you ever see one of these anywhere, anytime, in an attic or basement or whatever, these are worth a lot of money. So, certainly save them, grab them, hang on to them, because there are very few of them around. There were a couple at the Eli Buck auction where I got like my Clifton, and a small tabletop like this I think sold for in the neighborhood of 10 grand, and a GE console sold for like 15 grand. Just to give you some idea. It's a projection set. So they had them that long ago. Oh, there's a whole section on the iconoscope. Little did I know. You needed all that gear to test one out. If you read up on the science of these, they were just hideously complicated to use because of the way they created the photosensitive surface and scanned it. There'd be all kinds of distortions and aberrations in it. They would have these really elaborate compensating circuitry to take a very distorted, unfocused in some areas image and make it into something watchable. The iconoscope is so complicated they actually have multiple chapters on it. Wow, I have not seen one of those before. It must be an experimental version. I'd love to find one of those someday. So, for example, here they show correcting image defects caused by the curvature of the cathode on this tube. Yeah, some other interesting experimental models. I wonder if how many of these actually still exist somewhere in the world. Wow. Another crazy looking device. There's something else I'd really like to find someday. It's a monoscope. That's what they would use to make that old Indian head test pattern. It's sort of like a video camera tube, but instead of allowing outside light to come in, they would permanently mount a slide inside of the CRT or camera type tube, so it would always output the same image in nice sharp focus. They show up every now and then, but I've only seen one or two for sale. we're getting into picture tubes. Here's one of the pre-World War II picture tubes. Again, if you ever come across something that looks like this, you hang on to it and be very careful with it. Even if there were CRT rebuilders around, they generally couldn't handle these because they're made out of a different type of glass. I believe they were Pyrex. Very, very difficult to rebuild. And there's very few of these around that are still under a tight vacuum and produce a good image. It's a pretty crude looking early experimental one. Never saw something like that before. Wow. 31-inch. Crazy. I think I saw this from a different angle in another book, and this was used for the World's Fair or something like that. They actually had to run a vacuum pump continuously. I'm sure that's what this is, while they operated the CRT because it was just so large. And I think they used a metal cone and a glass front, and the seam between the two they just couldn't make vacuum tight, so it would have to suck air out of it while it was under operation. And then look at that crazy deflection angle. So, so deep. There's an example of it actually playing. Projection CRT. One of these days, when I've got more room, I hope to get a projection set. And there's a whole lot of math and theory, and finally here towards the back we get to actual complete schematics of an early receiver. Oops. When they had all of 5 channels they could receive. And they would power these things directly off of power transformers. They could put out like 7,500 volts. So they called these things lethal. A lot of voltage with a lot of current behind it. Ooh, fancy fold-out schematic. It's an early studio. Early camera. That's what's inside the camera. Studio console. And a monitoring unit. Thanks to a buddy of mine who delivered those Eli Buck auction sets, I've got the successor to this. And I'm very curious to get that thing up and running one of these days. Here's how they would convert film to video. Massive control panels to monitor all this stuff. I thought these were transmitters at first, but no, they are not. Wow. Imagine having to maintain that thing. I don't know what's inside all those cans. Might be tuned units, might be tubes in there. Regardless, wow. Yeah, experimental TV. That'd be worth a small fortune today, if it still exists anywhere. The deflection angles on these CRTs back then was so shallow. In other words, for like a 12-inch diameter screen, they'd be like 3 feet long. So they'd have to mount them vertically and then put a mirror in the top of the set. Cool, looks like the final section is on the Empire State transmitter. Here's all the various units. I assume it's like the floor plan of a large room, and these are all massive racks of equipment. They just couldn't generate carrier frequencies directly back then, so they had to use harmonic generators. Even though, I mean, by today's standards, the frequencies weren't all that high, like 50 megahertz, something like that. It's $8.99. Output stage 2. I love photos like this of these massive pieces of equipment, and some little guy way back here at a desk, keeping tabs on all this stuff. Thousands or hundreds of thousands of watts going all around him. And there's the actual antenna. That was probably his job, just to keep an eye on that and keep a logbook. And there's the mobile units. There's at least one video on YouTube that shows these things in action. Pretty nifty. Needed 2 huge trucks to do a mobile transmission. Alright. That's about it. Very cool book. Very glad to have it. Alright, before the sun goes down, let's take a look underneath this chassis. It's always one of my favorite things to do because you never know what you're going to find. Speaking of which, I just noticed this. It's an actual Admiral warranty replacement CRT from '56. This is a 48, maybe a 49 set. Sound 56, somebody had the CRT replaced, which means there's a pretty decent chance the CRT could be pretty good, unless of course somebody kept watching this set throughout the 50s into the 60s. But this guy actually had, let's see, he had a late mid-50s Bug-Eye set that was still working, and he had some Zenith black and white consoles in the basement that I believe were from the 60s. So the family definitely upgraded their TVs, and as he was saying, you know, his family, like most, grew up in the Depression era, saved everything. So they probably had every TV that they ever bought. They were all still there in the house. The basement, though, was very cluttered, and he didn't let me go down there to inspect it more closely. He said he definitely didn't have any color sets, but who knows? Maybe I'll get a chance to go back there sometime and take a closer look. Chassis is actually in really good shape. I don't think there's any corrosion on it whatsoever. It's just a little dirty. Of course, power cord is trashed. Well, it looks kind of scary, though. I bet somebody stripped off this and had spliced in a new power cord to keep it running. So those cheater cords I was just showing you, it's actually fairly easy to clip out this old one, the hardened vinyl, and the new ones you heat them up with a heat gun, which softens the vinyl, and you can mush it over the brass rivets here, and they fit on perfectly. That's why I think they're in such demand. I noticed there's a jack here, and I'm pretty sure the difference with the 30B1, because I've had a couple of 30B1 chassis, but they came from combo sets with like the double doors and a built-in AM/FM radio and phonograph. But I saw his cabinet, but it's just a console version. However, it has this jack here, so maybe this was made so you could plug in an external audio source. Well, of course, somebody also could have added that. Who knows? Because this is the audio cable for the TV that plugs into the lower chassis. Alright, let's see what's underneath this thing. Oh, I see a problem right away. We've got a very fried resistor. So fried, you can't even see the marks on it anymore. And plenty of these wax caps are really oozing out their ends. I don't see much in the way of repairs, though. That might be a replacement. Maybe this guy. But most of these look just like the ones I've seen in other sets. I've seen plenty of them by now. Huh. These two guys, which are probably the original, because these look just like ones I've seen in other sets. Huh. Oh, that doesn't look good. These crappy coated resistors. Alright, so if I was going to try powering this setup, and I'm still inclined to, I definitely want to replace that guy and this guy. Now, if this guy's fried, there's a pretty good chance that it's fried because something else was shorting out or drawing excessive current through it. So I'm going to pull out the service info and take a quick look and see what does that tie into. There are some multi-section electrolytics buried down in here, and it's a little hard to see them. It doesn't look like the guts are blown out. We got one down here, one up here. It is possible, certainly, for a resistor itself to just burn out, but usually it's because there's something drawing too much current through it. Vertical output transformer might have shorted out. I don't know. So another thing I'll do is look at this guy. Now, I do have a couple rebuilt power supply and audio amps that I know are good, but I don't know for 100% certain if they're compatible with the 30B1 chassis. Plus, well, they're in working sets, so I don't want to risk frying them. So I'm going to take out the 4 screws holding this down and see what kind of condition it's in. I already noted that there's some wax oozing out of the filter choke. So we got 2 power transformers, filter choke, audio output transformer, and the filter choke for the other side of the power supply. Comes from the speaker, field coil speaker. So there's 2 independent power transformers and power supplies going through here. And then there's a 2-stage audio amp as well. Before I muck around with anything else, I want to see if this picture tube's any good. So I'm just going to go quick and dirty this time with my B&K 440. Base on the CRT is pretty loose, and I don't see any logo, so this might be some sort of generic rebuild. I don't know. But let's see if it's any good. It's glowing. That's a good sign. And lights came up fairly quickly, also a good sign. And that indicates no shorts. No, this isn't the most accurate tester compared to the CR70, but no, it's not a good sign. Then again, this thing hasn't been turned on in a couple decades at least, so we'll see if it improves. Cut off control. It's a good sign too. Alright, so let this thing cook for a while, see where it ends up. Here's what I got after about half an hour with the regular 6.3 volts on the filament. It's just another green. That's good enough for me. Good enough to produce an image, that is. So I clear off some stuff off the workbench, and then I'll bring this stuff inside and poke around with it a little bit more. I took a look at the Sam's component identifier and determined the fried resistor is this guy, which is R100, and on the schematic it is right down in there, which is in parallel with the focus coil and the focus control, which is in series with the power resistor, and that's the crumbly, nasty looking one that we saw earlier, where the ceramic coating was flaking off. Now, all three of these are in parallel, and one side goes up and around and around and around and around and over to this plug. Well, I just happen to know from experience that that line is the main B+ supply for the whole chassis. Now, so we know that on this top side here we've got full output of that 5U4 rectifier. So if this resistor's frying, it could be because there's too much of a load on the other side. So what's on the other side? Well, off to the left, not much. Some resistors that go to tubes, nothing that would really draw an excessive amount of current. But on the other side, we've got one electrolytic, CRT, brightness control, and then some resistors, another resistor, and another electrolytic. So if that electrolytic was, say, shorted out, probably not too much of a problem because of the resistor in series, but you know, potentially that's a problem. But this one would certainly be a pretty major issue if that was shorted out. But also could be a problem with this. I've seen several Admirals where that focus control is open, and that resistor, that 1200 ohm, looks like it was in pretty poor condition and may very well be open. So with that being out of the circuit, there might be a bit more current going through this guy than there normally would be. So the first thing I want to do is check that resistor and that control. And if they are okay, then I will do a little leakage test on that guy. Otherwise, I'll replace these components. But it's getting fairly late. I got a bunch of junk on the workbench. Well, not junk, but other projects. So I'll save this maybe for tomorrow or the next day. But sometime very soon, I will try poking around with this set. Now, again, it's not that I intend to necessarily fully restore this to full working condition, but A, I'm just kind of interested and to see what was wrong with it. And B, it's a quick way to test all the components rather than individually test vertical output transformer, the chokes, the power transformer, the flyback, the yoke, and so on. If I can just get this thing to run for a few seconds, and say get a raster on the CRT, maybe some sound out of the speaker, that tells me that all the major components are good.